Liverpool football is officially back, and you already know what that means. Just like we did last season, starting all the way from the pre-season tour, we're doing the same thing again this year. We're covering it all, from the very first friendly to the final whistle of the campaign. The Reds kicked off their friendlies with a solid 3-1 win against Preston North End. Bradley, Darwin and Gakpo all got on the score sheet, and we also got a good look at some of the new faces and young talents in the squad. But that's not the full story. This game might have confirmed some of the things we saw in the final games of last season, and gave us a clearer look at what to expect going forward, especially when it comes to the way we're using our fullbacks. So you already know the drill. Hit those like and subscribe buttons, and let's get into the video. Before we dive in though, we need to take a moment to remember our beloved Diogo Jota and his brother. The club made the right call retiring his number, not just from the senior team, but across all levels of the club. It was a powerful gesture that showed just how much he meant to everyone. Before, during and after the match, our Portuguese legend was remembered in every single minute. From the fans constantly chanting his name, to the players who were clearly emotional, to Darwin, who honoured him with two of Jota's signature celebrations. He may be gone, but Diogo will always be with us. Always. Heading into the game, our starting lineup had a nice mix of youth and experience. Georgi Mamadashvili started in goal, with Joe Gomez and Lucas Stevenson as the centre-back pairing. Connor Bradley and Kostas Tsimikas took up the fullback positions. In midfield, we had Gravenberch, young Trey Nioni and Dominic Szoboszlai pulling the strings. Up front, it was Mo Salah, Federico Chiesa, and the exciting Rio Numoha leading the line. One of the first things we noticed in the opening 15 minutes was how both Tsimikas and Bradley pushed high up the pitch instead of holding back. If you remember last season, Arne Slot stuck with a more controlled 4-2 build-up, where the fullbacks usually stayed deep and tucked inside. Trent had a bit more freedom to move into different areas, but overall, there wasn't a lot of fluid movement from the fullbacks. This game, though, told a different story. Both Bradley and Tsimikas were pushing high into the half spaces, giving the wingers a passing option to bounce off of and combine with. It created more width and movement, and made our attack feel a lot more connected. Bradley in particular played almost like a fourth midfielder at times. Now, we saw him making those consistent runs into the half space last season, and he did that again in this match, but the conditions were different. This time, the young fullback didn't invert in the usual way. Instead, he tucked into the centre of the pitch to help overload Preston's midfield line. By doing that, he occupied and pinned their players in central areas, which helped create more space for Salah out wide. It also gave players like Nioni, Szoboszlai or Gravenberch the freedom to drop deeper or receive the ball in pockets of space. We actually saw this kind of movement starting to show up during the early pre-season phase, and by that we mean those final games of last season after we had already wrapped up the title. In the match against Brighton, for example, both of our fullbacks pushed high up the pitch, while Gravenberch dropped in between the centre-backs to help with the build-up. This is a great approach to take, especially when the opposition is pressing in a man-to-man fashion, something we struggled with last season in games like Everton, Lille, and even Southampton. So why is it effective? Well, to reach this shape, your team needs to perform rotations where players switch positions from their original roles. Rotations, as many people would say, are the kryptonite to man-marking systems. On top of that, when you push your fullbacks higher and split your centre-backs, it creates more space for them to work in. That's because you're increasing the pressing distance the opposition players have to cover, which makes it harder for them to stay tight and organised. Now, going back to Bradley, the youngster pulled off this role brilliantly. He was even rewarded with the first goal of the game, finding himself in the box for a simple tap-in. But that wasn't the only interesting thing we saw from Arne Slot's use of the fullbacks. In fact, there was more to come in the second half when our new flying fullbacks, Kerkez and Frimpong, came onto the pitch. But before we get into that, we need to talk about how we defended, because that also looked a bit different compared to last season. Instead of using the usual 4-2-4 shape out of possession, we pressed in more of a 4-2-3-1 setup this time. The pivot players still defended in a man-to-man style, staying tight to their direct opponents, just like we've seen before. But the front four did something a bit different. Rather than staying flat in a line, one striker led the press while the three players behind him spread out to cover the spaces horizontally. This helped cut off passing lanes and made it harder for Preston to play through the middle or switch the play quickly. This setup helps the pivot players avoid getting overloaded too easily. And even when they do get dragged out of position, the three pressing players behind can drop back to cover the spaces that open up. It adds an extra layer of protection and makes the team more compact defensively. Now, does that mean Arne Slot and his staff are already fixing the issues we saw last season? Honestly, it's still way too early to say for sure. But hey, it's a positive sign, isn't it? Switching back to how we might see our fullbacks operate, things got even more interesting in the second half. First, it was Frimpong who pushed high and wide to hold the width, while Kerkez stayed deeper to help with the build-up and progress the ball with his passing. But that doesn't mean Kerkez was just sitting back as a third centre-back the whole time. In this instance, you can see how Jones dropped between the centre-backs, while the other two midfielders pushed higher up the pitch to drag one or even two opposition players with them. That movement created space for Kerkez to step into, and he was then able to receive the ball in a much more advanced area. Knowing how good Kerkez is at carrying the ball, he didn't hesitate to bomb forward and drive into space. That exact sequence led to a dangerous situation in our favour. See guys, these different approaches show that we're not just trying to find new tactical solutions, we're also trying to get the best out of our players. Having Frimpong hold the width makes perfect sense, and letting Kerkez break from deep plays right into his biggest strength. But again, this is only the first game. Nothing is set in stone just yet, and we'll learn a lot more in the next few friendlies. Now, aside from tactics, we want to highlight a few individual performances. Take Rio Ngumoha, for example. He had a decent showing. The teenager showed off his dribbling ability, carrying the ball confidently and going straight at defenders. That said, he still needs to improve his ability to create separation when he's setting up to shoot. Trey Nyoni, on the other hand, had a very mature performance. He dropped deep when needed and moved forward with and without the ball, constantly offering solutions in possession. Stevenson did well covering the right-hand side whenever Bradley pushed up. And even Nallo had a solid showing in the second half, despite being a bit rash at times with his challenges. So overall, there's a lot to be excited about already. Yes, it's still early days, and yes, it's only a friendly, but still, that's a good sign. From the way we built up, to how the fullbacks were used, to some of the individual performances, there's clearly something cooking under Arne Slot. Do you guys feel the same, or do you think it's still too soon to say? Let's be honest, preseason isn't just about fitness anymore. It's about ideas. It's where managers try things, test players in different roles, and build chemistry across the squad. And with some of the changes we saw in this game, it feels like there's a plan forming. The big question is, can we carry this into the real matches when the pressure's on? Also, who impressed you the most? Was it a youngster like Nyoni or Ngumoha? Or maybe you were more focused on how the system looked overall? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we're curious what stood out to you. Anyway, we'll be keeping a close eye on the next few games, so make sure you're locked in. It's going to be a fun ride. Until next time, peace.